You know, when you hear the word crusade, a certain image probably pops into your head. Knights, armor, big battles, a holy war for Jerusalem, right? But the real story of the First Crusade, well, it's so much more complex, way more chaotic, and honestly, just a lot more unexpected. It's not a story about one single event. It's the story of a perfect storm, a storm that was about to change the world forever.
So to really get what happened, we've got to zoom out and look at the world in the late 11th century. And it wasn't one big unified place. It was really three very different civilizations, and all of them were kind of teetering on the edge of some massive change. You had the fragmented but super aggressive kingdoms of Western Christendom. Then, to the east, the ancient, wealthy, but fading Byzantine Empire. And further south, the incredibly sophisticated but deeply divided Islamic world. The First Crusade wasn't just some isolated event. It was the inevitable, massive collision of all three.
All right, so let's set the stage here. We're going to look at the volatile ingredients that were brewing in each of these worlds, the things that made a conflict on this scale not just possible, but maybe inevitable.
This right here gives you a fantastic snapshot of the whole situation. Over in Western Europe, you've got this political patchwork of little kingdoms, all full of heavily armed knights who spent most of their time fighting, well, each other. Then there's the Byzantine Empire, ancient, rich, the last remnant of Rome, but it was dangerously close to total collapse. And then you have the Islamic world, a powerhouse of science and culture, but it was split wide open by political rivalries and the huge religious divide between Sunnis and Shias. Each one of these worlds was basically a powder keg, just waiting for a spark.
So let's zoom in on that first powder keg, Western Europe. Because here, the medieval church was in the middle of this massive power struggle, and not just with kings and emperors, but with itself.
In the Middle Ages, the church was, well, it was everything. It was the one international power that tied all of Europe together. And for the average person, its influence was total, and let's be honest, absolutely terrifying. Just look at this doom painting. You would find these in churches all over the place, and they were a constant, graphic reminder that your eternal soul was on the line and that hell was a very, very real and very gruesome possibility.
But you know, behind the scenes, the church was filled with corruption. One of the biggest problems was something called simony, basically the buying and selling of powerful positions in the church. As one source puts it so well, these appointments were sold rather like stocks and shares are today. Kings and nobles would decide who got to be a bishop, and they'd make a fortune doing it. And this, as you can imagine, drove a new generation of reformers in the church absolutely crazy.
This whole battle for the soul of the church just exploded into a full-blown political war we call the investiture contest. It was a massive showdown between the popes and the most powerful ruler in Europe, the Holy Roman Emperor. So when a kid, Henry IV, takes the throne, reformers, led by Pope Gregory VII, saw their chance. They went after simony, Henry fought back, and in 1076, the Pope did something unthinkable. He excommunicated the emperor. I mean, this was a political nuclear bomb. Henry's nobles immediately started to rebel, and he was forced into this incredibly humiliating apology, standing barefoot in the snow at Canossa for 3 whole days, just begging for the Pope to forgive him.
So the big takeaway here is that this whole conflict created a new kind of papacy, one that was way more aggressive and ambitious. Popes who came after, like Urban II, were now actively looking for some grand project, a huge cause that would prove once and for all that their spiritual power put them above every single king and emperor. They were ready to think big.
Okay, now let's shift over to our second powder keg and see how this all connects. We're heading east, to the glittering capital of the Byzantine Empire, which was staring down its own existential crisis. I mean, just look at this. This was Constantinople. For hundreds of years, it was the biggest, richest city in the entire Christian world. It was the capital of a sophisticated empire that saw itself as the true heir to the Roman Empire. But by the late 1090s, this magnificent jewel was in some very, very serious trouble. The empire was being squeezed from literally all sides. From the west, you had Norman adventurers taking over territory in southern Italy. From the north, Pecheneg tribes were raiding deep into the Balkans. But the biggest threat by far came from the east. After a totally catastrophic defeat at the Battle of Manzikert in 1071, the empire lost most of Anatolia, its heartland, to the Seljuk Turks. The Byzantines were right on the brink of collapse. So, in this incredibly desperate situation, the Byzantine emperor, a guy named Alexios Komnenos, made a fateful choice. In 1095, he sent a group of envoys to Pope Urban II. His request was pretty simple. He needed professional soldiers.
He was basically hoping the Pope could help him hire a few regiments of those famously violent Western knights to work as mercenaries. He had absolutely no idea what he was about to unleash.
And this is it. This is the moment the two worlds collide. You've got an emperor's desperate plea for mercenaries landing right in the lap of a pope who's looking for a grand cause. This was the spark that was going to light the whole thing up.
So Pope Urban II gets the emperor's request, but he doesn't answer right away. He waits. He travels to his home turf in France and calls a much bigger meeting at a place called Clermont. Then, on November 27, 1095, he makes his move. So many people showed up to hear him talk that they had to move the whole thing to a field outside the city. And right there, in a field packed with knights and nobles, he gave one of the most important speeches in all of history.
And he didn't just ask for mercenaries. No, he completely reframed the entire mission. He talked about Christian suffering, about holy places being defiled, and he issued this thunderous call to arms. He was speaking directly to the warrior class of Europe, basically giving them a brand new holy purpose for all their violent skills.
Honestly, Urban's plan was nothing short of masterful. The crusade wasn't just a response, it was a proactive solution to pretty much all of the papacy's biggest headaches. It would cement his authority over kings, it gave him a chance to heal the big split with the Eastern Church, but with Rome in charge. It was a shot at capturing the ultimate prize, Jerusalem, and maybe the most brilliant part, it would take all that destructive, violent energy from Europe's knights and point it outward, at a common enemy.
The response was, well, it was overwhelming. Way beyond what Urban or anyone else could have possibly imagined. But who were these people? Who were the ones who dropped everything to march thousands of miles into the complete unknown?
Okay, so this is the image we all have in our heads, right? The stoic knight, decked out in heavy armor, driven by faith and a code of chivalry. It's a really powerful and romantic image, for sure. But it's also completely wrong. Or, at the very least, it's a deeply incomplete picture.
The reality was so much more complex and way more interesting. Because, as the historian Helen Nicholson argues, the simple truth is that the Crusade movement absolutely 100% needed women to even function.
So let's actually break down the roles people played. On the campaign, women weren't just following along, they were providing essential labor. We're talking laundry, delousing, nursing the sick and wounded, even acting as midwives. And the noble women they left behind at home? They became powerful regents. They managed huge estates, raised money, and settled all the debts their husbands left behind. They were absolutely crucial. And it wasn't just knights and their families. Monks, priests, common laborers, and the poor all joined in on what they saw as this great pilgrimage.
This is exactly why it's such a mistake to think of the First Crusade as just an army. It was something totally new. It was the mass migration of a whole slice of European society. Men, women, rich, poor, everybody moving east together on what they believed was a great armed pilgrimage.
And this brings us to that third and final powder keg. This passionate, zealous, and utterly chaotic force was heading straight for an Islamic world that was, in a lot of ways, far more advanced. But, and this is a huge but, it was also politically shattered. Deep divisions, especially that rivalry between the Sunni Caliphate in Baghdad and the Shia Caliphate in Egypt, meant there was no unified front. Local rulers were way more worried about fighting each other than dealing with some new, unexpected threat from the far west. They were just not ready for the storm that was about to hit them.
So, what was the First Crusade really? Was it a legitimate rescue mission to save the Byzantine Empire? A holy war to liberate Jerusalem? Or was it just a cynical political power grab by an ambitious pope?
Well, the answer, of course, is that it was all of those things, all at once. It was a perfect storm of faith and greed and ambition that nobody, not the Pope, not the Emperor, and definitely not the knights themselves, could ever fully control. It's just a powerful reminder that history's biggest turning points often don't come from some simple, single plan. They're born from a messy, chaotic, and ultimately unpredictable collision of worlds. A collision whose echoes, you could argue, we can still feel today.